Okay, it says we're live. We're on YouTube. We are on my X account mostly, and we are on Facebook. So the headline today is that there are 15 superintendents in Texas making more than the president of the United States. Now, Trump doesn't make any money from being president because he doesn't accept it. But by statute, presidents can make $400,000 a year. So as we're having people pop in, you can check it out. If you're in Texas, you can look for your school district. But as you can see, there are 15 of them where they're making in base salary. This doesn't even count their total compensation. If we did that, it would have been more than 15 superintendents, but they're making more than $400,000 a year. And you look at this, there's no correlation with the outcomes. You look at the top school district, you just look really quickly, you'll see there's no correlation between spending and outcomes when it comes to superintendent salaries. There was a correction here. They said, oh, it wasn't actually $627,000, even though the Texas Education Agency shows that as the number. They claim it's $350,000 to $400,000 or something along those lines. But even then, that school district only has about a 20% math proficiency rate. It's totally ridiculous. They're making so much money. The teachers aren't seeing it. If you look since 2000, I found the data at the National Center for Education Statistics. Teacher salaries in Texas have actually dropped by 6% in real terms. But now you have all these superintendents who, by the way, were the biggest people, the loudest opponents of the school choice bill in Texas. Okay, so we have some people that have jumped on. I'd say let's get into intros, and hopefully we have plenty to talk about. We're going to be talking like Ben Shapiro today as fast as we can because there's so many good stories. Last week we talked about the good, the bad, and the ugly. I will tell you this conversation today is more so heavily focused on the good. There's a lot of good things happening in terms of dismantling the teachers union monopoly or cartel, go with the word you'd like. But there's a lot of legislation flying around. There's a lot of headlines flying around of unions being held accountable. And we'll get to that in a second. My co-host today is the same as always. Obviously, my new co-host is Chip Rogers. He is CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. He has a lot of other accolades, which make my resume, it puts me to shame. I get a little jealous checking out. He's like the top lobbyist in Washington. He was ranked 5 years in a row. He was the Senate Majority Leader in Georgia for 2 terms consecutively, and I believe he had unanimous support in being the Senate Majority Leader in Georgia. And so everybody welcome my buddy Chip Rogers, who by the way, I'm also at Americans for Fair Treatment as a senior fellow in addition to my role as a research fellow at the Heritage Foundation. But let's jump into it, everybody. Most people who have jumped on now hadn't seen this list, so I'll put it back on the screen. There is this is trending on X right now, and it has for the past day. And there are 15 superintendents, over a dozen in Texas, who make more than the president. If you didn't hear a second ago, the president is supposed to make $400,000 a year. Trump doesn't accept that salary, but you have 15 of them in Texas making over $400,000 a year. And, look, Barbers Hill, over $500,000 a year, $513,000. You'd think that there may be some sort of correlation here between spending or at least salaries for these people and their outcomes. But you go to the top school district here, Harlandale, being paid the most according to TEA data. They only have 20% of their kids proficient in math. And it's similarly abysmal outcomes for reading. And some people might say, oh, there's some big Texas school districts. Maybe it's because they educate more kids. Well, one, they're not educating them if they're not proficient in reading. And 2, there's no correlation from what I can tell. There's a lot of small school districts on this list where they're making so much money. They're squandering taxpayer dollars. And guess what? The teachers aren't seeing the money. You look in Texas, there's data since 2000 that I've seen on this. The average teacher salary in Texas has actually dropped since 2000 by 6% in real terms after adjusting for inflation. And yet you have the superintendents making more than they've ever made before. And it might not be a coincidence where the school choice bill in Texas just passed. And by the way, other good news from Texas is we have about over 220,000 families have applied for their new scholarship program. The application window is still open for a couple of weeks. And in the past 6 weeks alone, 220,000 applications. And that's with parents knowing that there's a cap on the program of about 100,000 kids. And so there's going to be over 120,000 kids on a wait list in Texas, which lawmakers need to come back immediately. But while we were fighting and to get rid of that cap, but while we were fighting for this bill to pass in Texas, Chip, the loudest opponents were the superintendent people and the superintendent unions. And I think it's because they knew they're not adding a lot of value here. They're stealing money from teachers, and their little fiefdoms might come to an end when they actually have some competition and can't just pad their own pockets.
Yeah, it gets back to the core of the entire issue, Corey. And I remember having these discussions when I was working on educational freedom legislation in Georgia so long ago. And I would have some of my colleagues come to me and they're like, well, my superintendent doesn't like it. And I would always say, put your superintendent on the phone. I would pick up the phone, talk to the superintendent. First thing they would launch into is, my school system is great. Everybody loves it here. And then I would respond with, well, then you have nothing to worry about, because if you're doing a phenomenal job, as good as you say you are, no one's going to leave. So why would you care? But when you really think about it, these folks, I mean, my idea for a good educator, whether it's in the classroom or all the way up to the superintendent, is someone who says, you know what? I want the children in my city, county, district, state to receive the best education possible. Like, that's the person I want involved in education. They care about kids receiving the best education possible. And if they do, then the decision is, who knows best about the best education? Is it the government? Is it that superintendent that doesn't even know that child's name? Or is it the parents that created that child? The parents that love that child more than any other people on earth? Who should make that decision on what is best for that child? And so I always found these superintendents, who oftentimes don't even know the students because they're stuck in the central office, talking about how they're going to stop educational freedom, as just one of the more offensive statements that you can make. Like, let kids get the best education possible. Now, I don't get upset about their salaries if they're tied to performance. So the gentleman making $600,000 a year, if all his kids are going to elite schools or going into the trades and creating a career for themselves and coming out highly educated, well, then he or she probably deserves to be well compensated. It might not be that amount, but they deserve to be well compensated. But as you noted, the compensation doesn't seem in any way, shape, or form to be tied to the performance. And every other type of entity, you're tied to performance. When you're in the private sector, either you deliver or you don't deliver. And if you don't deliver, you don't have that job anymore. But for some reason in education, when education is not being delivered, when children aren't learning and advancing, the answer is always, well, let's just throw more money at it. And sometimes when you throw more money at it, it just ends up in the pockets, as we see right here.
That's right.
Of those superintendents making, as you pointed out, way more than the president. Again, I don't begrudge anyone from making a living. I mean, when people complain about Elon Musk, I'm saying, well, if anybody else could have done any of that, they would be, almost a trillionaire as well. I don't begrudge him.
But Elon Musk, as you say, is competing in an open market, and people can vote with their feet away from his products, right? So, like, when it comes to private schools, some people say, oh, well, where's the list for the private schools? Well, it's not public information. And by the way, if they were making $1 million a year, that's not the problem. If the private schools, before the school choice program was implemented, they were competing against something that costs zero at the point of entry. And so that any private schools exist in Texas, knowing that they have to compete with something that has a price tag of zero, which we all know it costs a ton of money through the property tax system, where property taxpayers can't get any relief in Texas. Places like Florida, they have lower property taxes than us, maybe because school choice competition has created downward pressure on their school system. They spend 27% less than the national average in Florida, and they're knocking it out of the park on academic outcomes. And so many studies have come out showing that the improvement of the public schools has come alongside the increase in the amount of school choice competition. In Florida, they put us to shame right now with their scholarship program. They have over 600,000 kids using scholarships to go to a private school or private alternative in Florida, whereas Texas, we have this arbitrary cap of 90 to 100,000 kids. Over 120,000 kids are going to be on a waiting list. Even if the applications were shut down today, they're going on for 2 more weeks. That shows you parents demand options right now. If charter school teachers were or superintendents were making this much, I wouldn't have a problem with that either. So I agree with you, Chip, that the problem is that they're insulated from competition. Resources are scarce. They're squandering money from taxpayers, and they're not even giving it to the most important educational resource in the school, which happens to be the teacher. And meanwhile, the teachers are digging into their pockets every year, trying to buy supplies for their students. Their salaries are going down. And the thing is, the superintendents brainwashed them into thinking that the problem is their competition in the form of private schools, when the real problem is coming right from the very top, because they're pocketing the money for themselves. And the other thing they're doing is just fighting to hire more people, which benefits the union bosses because that means more dues paying members. And it benefits the superintendents because they could say, oh, we have this huge district, we're employing all these people, and that's why you should pay me so much money because I'm at the top of the totem pole. But their gravy train's coming to an end, and I think they know it.
You know, Corey, every time I talk to a teacher, and I do talk to quite a few teachers, I have mothers who are retired school teacher, every one of them, when you get in a private conversation with them, will say, I don't know what all those people at the central office do. Every single one of them. Well, we know what teachers do. They work their butts off in the classroom. Is every teacher good? Of course not. Is every teacher bad? Of course not. Just like every other profession, there are good, there are bad. And I wish for a day where the good ones got paid a heck of a lot more and the bad ones found something else to do. But they're not the problem. The problem is that the central office is bloated, and then you see these payments that are going to the superintendents that are not in any way, shape, or form connected to performance. And I'll point out one other thing. If Harlandale, if you go back up to the top there, Harlandale School, if that were a private school and they had 27% achievement on grade level for reading or math or whatever, you know what would happen? That number would go to 0 because that school would close down, as it should close down when you're failing students.
That's right. And yeah, some people will say, well, what about the charter schools? I think there was a charter school superintendent that was actually paid pretty well as well on the list. But, look, in Texas and other states, the charter schools, if anything, they're receiving less money per student than the district schools. I did a report on this when I was at the University of Arkansas, and they do this every year. They redo the numbers, and they found that the charter schools, and I found this in my study as well, they receive about 30% less on a per student basis than their district school counterparts in the same area. So if they can afford to pay people a higher salary because they're actually producing something people want, and yes, families are voluntarily voting with their feet there, I don't have a problem with salaries being what they are. What I do have a problem is people being forced into this system where you have individuals profiting from that force. And underperforming charter schools, private schools, they shut down, whereas underperforming district monopoly schools, they end up getting more money because they use that failure as a reason why they need more funding. And it's a never-ending vicious cycle. We have 20% proficiency because they'll say, oh, this Harlandale guy's not being paid enough. I mean, maybe if he was paid $700,000 a year, maybe we'd get to 30% proficiency. But as you pointed out, Chip, that fantasy never comes true. It's just,
and it never will. Yeah,
it's a definition of insanity.
Yeah.
So what do you grade this story from the Texas school system and their superintendent salaries that just became public?
Yeah, I'm going to give it a D. Look, I don't want to give it an F because I'm one of those that don't mind people getting paid when they succeed. Yep. And I don't know that all of these folks have failed. I'd also have to see the type of school that they're working in. But it is alarming when you see these type of numbers and then match it up with just the baseline educational performance. So I'm going to give it a D.
All right, cool. Yeah, I agree with you. And that gets me to another story from Chip Roy out of Texas. Actually had a congressional hearing this Wednesday in DC, and it was a committee hearing, and he called to overturn a Supreme Court decision called the Plyler decision, which actually came out of Texas in 1982. It's a 45-year-old decision. And basically what it says is that all states are compelled to force taxpayers to fund a public education for illegal immigrants, which I thought education was a state's issue. The word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. And it was great timing for this hearing to happen because I wrote this on Monday in Fox News, where I highlighted a bill in Tennessee that would take steps towards at least maybe mounting a challenge to the Plyler decision. And what they're doing in Tennessee is they have two versions of the bill. One's in the House and one is in the Senate. The Senate bill passed already from that chamber 20-13. And what it does is three things. One is it requires public school districts simply to report the amount of illegal immigrants that are in their school system, just to have some information. The House bill does that as well, but that's where the House bill stops. And they passed theirs 70-25, overwhelmingly along party lines. The Senate bill goes a little further in that it additionally says that school districts can reject, to refuse to enroll illegal immigrant students from their school system if they'd like. And if those families would still like to send their kids there, the public school districts would still be allowed to charge those families tuition if they wanted. And so this was one of those stories where people were like, we didn't know that this was something that happened at the Supreme Court. And so there's renewed calls to overturn the decision. It previously passed 5-4. We have a new, more conservative Supreme Court now. I'd say education is a state's issue. If California wants to continue doing this, that's fine. If Texas wants to go another route, they should be able to make that choice at the state level if they'd like. But it shouldn't come from this judicial activism from the bench over about a half a century ago, basically telling states how they must allocate scarce taxpayer resources, which are supposed to be meant for people who are here legally, not illegally. And the reason I bring this story up on this show today, which mostly focuses on union issues, is because the teachers' unions benefit from illegal immigrants in at least two ways, I would say, Chip. One is obvious. More enrollment counts means more funding per student, which means more union dues ultimately at the end of the day. And then also, if you have more ESL teachers and teaching English in the school, you're going to have more dues-paying members as well. So the teachers' unions have actually pushed to oppose all of Trump's immigration agenda. There's a lot of anti-ICE protests that are organized by the teachers' unions, and they passed a resolution at their annual meeting last year dedicating resources to opposing Trump's policies overall, but also to mobilize students to protest Trump's immigration agenda as well. So I think where this is relevant is that teachers unions shouldn't be taking political sides on political issues, and they certainly shouldn't be using member dues to fund their political advocacy.
Well, that goes without saying, and people are going to hear that recurring theme quite a bit because it's the basis of what we do. But I will say a couple of things on this particular issue. One, imagine a scenario where a student who lives across the border in Kentucky shows up at a Tennessee school and says, "Hey, I want you, and I want the Tennessee taxpayers to pay for my education. Now, I live in Kentucky. That's where I'm a resident, not a resident of Tennessee, but I want you to pay for my education." Rightfully so, Tennessee, because education is a state issue, would say, no, we're not paying for the resident of someone, or the education of someone who's not a resident of our state or who's not a Tennessean. And so that goes to the core of probably what I think was the legal flaw in the decision. That is, these are clearly state issues because education is administered by the state, not by the federal government. So that's probably the legal argument that I would make. Now, the real issue is something I saw with my own two eyes, okay? And so when I've told this story before, people are like, there's no way. So this is probably, well, it's 20 years ago because it was 2005. And I went to the border in Nogales, Arizona. And I was with some other lawmakers. And I was also there with a gentleman who had just recently retired, 30 years working for Border Patrol. And he'd worked both the northern border and the southern border, so he had seen it all. And we're sitting there right outside the fence with Mexico in Nogales, Arizona. And if I had not seen this with my own eyes, I would never have believed it. School bus after school bus after school bus after school bus, multiple, probably at least 4, pull up to the border, stop, all the children get out, they walk across the border into Mexico. And I'm asking this agent, I'm like, what is going on? He's like, yeah, they live in Mexico. They're citizens of Mexico.
Come here for school every day. It's crazy.
And hundreds of them, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them come across. The buses pick them up right there. They take them to school. They come back. They go back across the border to their home.
So not only are they not legal residents, legal citizens of the United States, they don't even live here, and they're busing them across the border. That is insane. So I actually,
because of the Plyler decision, says if they show up, you have to educate them. Now, you may say to yourself, we want to raise, you want to raise private funds and go to Mexico and set up a school and help these kids. And I'd probably even donate to that because they need it. And that's fine, right? That's the humane thing to do. But to just say we're going to force the taxpayers of whatever that county is in Nogales, Arizona, to have to foot the bill for this, that's wrong, right?
Yeah,
and
I mean, I had people in Texas replying to my posts about this and them saying, yeah, they bust kids across the border from Mexico all the time. And I'm like, I hadn't heard about this. And then you bring it up as well. So it's seems to be a more widespread issue than a lot of people would like to admit. And the other thing that someone brought up to me is what you brought up as well. When I was being interviewed on radio, the host the other day, he's a Newsmax host, but he also does a radio show, Lars Larson. He pointed out that, yeah, if you try to cross the district line, not even a state line, but a district line to go to a different public school district in America, they'll fine you. I've had families, there have been families that have lied about their address to get into better public schools in different school districts within the same state, and they've gone to jail for doing so. There's an Ohio parent that's gone viral in the news for going to jail just for trying to get her kid into a better school. But now all of a sudden you take an illegal immigrant. If they cross whatever line they want, the Plyler decision says their parents aren't going to go to jail. They're not going to get a fine like American parents would. They're going to be greeted with doors wide open and say, oh, no, yep, you can get in whatever school district you want, regardless of where you live. And that just shows to me it's inequality under the law. American citizens are being treated as second class, whereas people who are not even here legally, they're getting to go to whatever school district they want because the district boundaries don't apply to them. One last example on this. I live in San Antonio, and we have a neighboring school district here called Alamo Heights. Everybody wants to go there. That's kind of the best school district in the area. And they allow you to transfer in if you have certain, track records and disciplinary records that are on board with what they want. So it's not really a public school in a sense. It's more of a private institution. And they also charge tuition. If me as a San Antonio resident, Texas resident, wants to send my kid to Alamo Heights, if they check all the boxes with the disciplinary and test scores and stuff, they also, in addition to what I'm paying in property taxes, they will charge $10,000 or more a student. So you're basically paying twice. It's basically like a private school district, which it's a public school district, but they're operating in a private way. And what was so hypocritical to me during the school choice fight here a couple of years ago, this same school district put out a bunch of lobbying material against the school choice program. So what did I do? I emailed their superintendent's office and had them call me back. And I was just acting like a parent who wanted to know about their policies. And I said, if this school choice program passes, are you guys going to accept the $10,000 scholarship as tuition payment? Because that would be hypocritical if you guys were against it. And then once it passes, you guys are accepting all the money for kids. I bet you they're going to accept it. The thing is, they would not give me an answer, Chip. They were just like, well, we don't know the specifics. I'm like, the specifics are out there. Here's the bill. It's $10,000. You can use it for public or private schools materials. And, you guys are so against it. Would you support me being able to pay using that scholarship to send my kid to Alma Heights? And so they wanted an answer. They knew they were in a catch-22 situation. It'll be funny to see how that plays out. I bet you they would more than happy to accept it.
on that note, Corey, is that I've talked to so many teachers who tell me, and I don't know that this is uniform across the country, so I'm not suggesting that it is, but so many teachers who tell me that as their role as a public school teacher, and God bless them, thank them for working in a public school, that they're allowed to take their kids with them to their school, even if they don't live in that district. And so I always thought that, well, that's interesting. You're taking advantage of, and I support it, school choice because of your employment. You get to take your kid to school of your choice, but your union is fighting against anyone else doing that. And that just seems a little hypocritical.
Yeah, exactly. And, school choice can also help the teachers themselves because they can start micro schools. Some of these ESA programs, you can use the funding for tutoring. Public school teachers could, on their free time, start tutoring classes, and they can benefit from these things. You're going to need the teachers somewhere, right? I mean, even if a lot of people left the public schools and you didn't need as many teachers there, there's going to be more jobs in the private sector as a result. But we haven't seen anywhere where, teachers are losing jobs just because of school choice programs passed. It's never happened.
Yeah. And to that point, Corey, I used to make that argument to teachers all the time is that, look, one of the things you say where you're at a disadvantage in the private schools is they have fewer students per class. Well, if you do the math and they have fewer students per class, that means they're going to need more teachers overall. So arguably supporting school choice means more teachers, not less.
Yeah, and you have a lower class size, you'd have more autonomy. And the Washington Post wrote about this during COVID, and they didn't know what they were saying at the time, but they basically admitted school choice was a good thing because they highlighted a New Jersey public school teacher who started a micro school because the government schools were closed for COVID reasons and other reasons as well, political, I would say. They had a class size of 12 kids, and they didn't have a school choice program, but they were able to make it work with teachers who had the money to be able to pay for it. Yeah. Just think about it. You take the $20,000 a kid we're spending in public schools. If you would have give that directly to the teacher, that's $240,000 in revenues with the smaller class size, more autonomy. It's a win-win situation. The parents are better off. The teachers are better off. But the union bosses don't want you to believe that. So what do you think, Chip, on this story of Tennessee making these moves and how the teachers unions have kind of been involved in these conversations and why?
Look, I'll give Tennessee a B for their attempt. If the Supreme Court takes this up and overturns Plyler, I'll give them an A+.
There we go. Yeah, sounds like a good call. We have many more stories to hit. Let's exit these ones out so I have some room on my computer screen. This is probably one of the biggest wins of the past week. I'd say the biggest win. And so the Florida Senate passed a bill 20-14 and moved over to the House. It passed just the other day, 73-37, overwhelmingly support. And it's a bill to hold the teachers unions accountable there. And Chip, you and I were watching this closely. You had the teachers union president out there, Andrew Spar. He was just huffing and puffing on video every single morning, just freaking out about this bill. And you'd think that the sky was falling, yet all it does is basically two main things. It bans taxpayer-funded union time for politics. So if you're a teacher and you're going to represent teachers at the bargaining table, that can still be taxpayer funded. I would argue that probably shouldn't be, but this measure only bans taxpayer funded union time for non-representational activities. So if you're going out and campaigning for a union-backed candidate or doing other political work for the unions, well, we're not going to have taxpayers fund that. You can still do it, but why should the taxpayer have to fund it? And then the other part that really got a lot of attention was this right here. 50% of the voters need to vote to show up to vote for whether they're going to recertify the union every single year. So if you have at least 50% people there, out of that 50% of the voting members need to support recertification. If you don't get 50%, just at least a majority of your members saying that they want to recertify, your union's not going to be certified the next year. And I will say the Senate, the House version originally didn't have this quorum requirement. It was just simple. It was a little bit more simple. And it was just 50% of your members had to vote to recertify. And so you actually had to get a true majority in support. So this is a little bit watered down, but it is a huge step in the right direction, because in Florida today, before this is enacted, you can have 3 people go and show up and have those 3 people vote to recertify, even if you don't have broad support among union membership. So what I know you've been following this closely, Chip. What are your thoughts on what's been going down in Florida?
Well, this is one, as you know, Corey, because you helped so much, that AFFT was heavily involved with, among many other organizations. We certainly thank them for their support. And again, it's just common sense. The first thing is, without question, absolutely necessary, and that is, if you're out doing union activity, why on earth should the taxpayers be paying you? Like, that's absurd. No other entity, no other business gets that, having the taxpayers pay them to work on things that don't benefit the taxpayers. In fact, I would argue actually are counter benefiting the taxpayers. It's damaging the taxpayers. So that was an easy one, right?
Yeah.
The second one really gets into, if you are a union and you're representing the workers, then you should have a majority of their support. That is a very
democracy
idea. Yes,
yeah.
That's it. You shouldn't be allowed to have, as you say, and as was in practice, a handful of people show up to vote, and that handful, whatever their decision is, now gets applied to every other teacher. This is very simple. You got to have at least half the people that are going to be represented by whatever decision is made show up to vote, and then half of those people have to vote in favor of it, half plus one. And so common sense, if you sat down and talked with almost any Florida voter, they would say, yeah, this is easy common sense, right?
Yeah.
The unions, of course, are typically out of the mainstream, and they are again here. I suspect after this becomes law, we're not going to hear much more about this from them, because they recognize that their position is wildly unpopular, because the position that was adopted by the legislature and soon to be signed by the governor is just common sense.
Yeah, Governor DeSantis is going to sign it. We don't know when. Just a plug for next week on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, I'll be talking to Education Commissioner Stasi Kamutsas. So if you want to tune in, then I'll be live on X talking to Stasi. Great education commissioner in Florida. He was very supportive of this bill to hold the teachers unions accountable there. And I will say, the teachers union out there that really lit the spark that lit the powder keg on this issue was the Florida Education Association. They're the state level affiliate of both the NEA and the AFT. Our friend Randy Weingarten, I'll share you a video of her freaking out about this victory in Florida as well in a second. She'll join us on the stage in a second. But you had them they had a press conference, the Florida Education Association, where they had one of their select handful of speakers call anti-ICE student walkouts both rational and required. And you had the Tampa Bay Times, when this bill started moving, they blamed yours truly for the bill gaining steam again. We would have gotten away with it if it weren't for that meddling school choice evangelist. But they basically said that the bill was dormant, that it was basically, they thought it was going to be dead. And then all of a sudden, this video got millions of views just on my post alone. There were a lot of other groups posting this as well, but mine just had the most views, and I guess caught the attention of this Tampa Bay Times reporter. And he basically tried to interview me on this. And he was like, instead of asking me why this bill was a good idea, the reporter tried to pull a gotcha and was just like, what motivates you so much as being a Texan to why you're so like, why do you care so much about what's happening in Florida? They wanted to make it a story about me instead of the legislation and why it's actually gaining steam. But that's too bad. So sad. They lost on this issue. And Randy Weingarten, in her weekly video update this past week, put it as one of her main things that she was crying about. So let's all listen to Randy Weingarten herself talking about this victory for us in Florida, which she calls a loss.
Sometimes we lose, like in Florida. Even with a big organizing effort, the legislature rammed through a proposal by Governor DeSantis designed to decimate our Florida locals and their contracts. It effectively forces annual union elections where you have to turn out over 50% of your entire bargaining unit.
Randy Weingarten is a threat to democracy if I've ever seen one, but they call us that all the time. She doesn't want 50% of her members to vote for recertification. What's your take on what Randy Weingarten's whining about?
Well, look, if you can get away with it, just keep trying to get away with it. She's tacitly acknowledging that she doesn't have the full support, or at least half the support of her membership, by suggesting that them having to vote in favor, half of them, is some sort of ridiculous threshold. I also love the terminology that those who don't like when something happens, they say they ran it through, or sometimes they rammed it through, right? No, this went through the normal legislative process. We
Went through
watched this
6 committees.
Yeah, there were 6 committees. And so it's just, look, if you're going to speak to your supporters, just be honest with them. Say, look, the Florida legislature took it up and went through the normal process. We lost. Now, I would argue you lost because you're on the wrong side of the issue, but you lost. And taxpayers in Florida will be better off for it. Students in Florida will be better off for it. Parents in Florida will be better off for it. And frankly, teachers in Florida will be better off for it, because they will have a union if more than half of them support it, and they won't have a union forced on them if not more than half of them support it.
And I'd say this is the bare minimum, Chip, because they don't even have to get 50% of their members in theory to support. If they only got 50% to show up, and then out of that 50%, 50%, voted in favor, you do the quick math on that, that's only 25% or more of the union members. And they're going to try to get their 50% most radical members to show up to vote, to try to stack the deck against people who want to hold the unions accountable. So I'd say this is the bare minimum, but it is a huge step in the right direction, because you're right, only a handful of people are showing up, and they could just say, oh yeah, we'll pick 5 people who are our buddies to go vote to recertify every year. So what's your grade, Chip, on Florida's victory?
Got to give the lawmakers in my native state of Florida an A on this effort. Fantastic.
There we go. Yes, me too. I would have given it an A+ if the original bill in the House would have passed, but they are so close, and it's a huge step forward. It definitely deserves an A. And another place where we had a big victory is Kentucky. I'm going to play this in a second. It's a hilarious, epic troll by the Kentucky Senate Republicans. They held a funeral for the veto of by Andy Beshear, a Democrat, who vetoed a school choice bill. They overrode it overwhelmingly. All Republicans in favor. A lot of Democrats didn't vote, and the only people who voted against it happened to be Democrats. And it was like 80 to 90% of each chamber voted to override the veto of Governor Andy Beshear, who went to a private school himself for part of his education. I found the yearbook. It's a Capital Day school, and which is hilarious, because Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, who opposes school choice every step of the way, he has bragged on video many times that he's a proud product of public education, but the majority of his K-12 education was in a private school. And that was not public until I had someone DM me his yearbook, who apparently had some connection to the school. And there, lo and behold, there's Andy Beshear going to private school. And then I also found someone sent me a newspaper clipping where they wrote about Governor Andy Beshear going to a private school. And this was back, decades ago when they wrote about this, I believe when his dad was governor or something along those lines. But here's the audio.
Or it's like Gavin Newsom claiming he grew up poor.
Yeah. And Gavin Newsom, remember when he was complaining about about Zoom school during COVID, but then we found out that he was sending all of his kids to private school that had in-person opportunities. It's just so crazy, just trying to, he had the French laundry hypocrisy, closing down restaurants and stuff, and then requiring masks. And then there he was at the expensive restaurants going and eating. It's a school choice for me, but not for thee. And you see this time and time again. But this was hilarious.
Hello, everyone. We're here on this St. Patty's Day to mourn the death of Andy's veto and to celebrate for Kentucky's kids with the final passage of House Bill 1.
Okay, a little bit of a fail at the end with the timing of the celebration with the poppers, but it was a hilarious, epic troll from the Kentucky Senators going and calling out Andy Beshear and saying, "That's too bad, so sad. No veto for you." And just real quick, this program is not a state level program; it's the federal tax credit. The governors have the decision whether they want to opt into the school choice program that was passed in Trump's big, beautiful bill, and is privately funded through tax credit donations. You can get a dollar for dollar tax credit up to $1,700 a year to donate to organizations like ACE Scholarships and others who do these scholarship there's scholarship granting organizations that give to other families who go get the scholarships. So the scholarship could actually be a lot more than 1,700. They can stack those. It could be, 5,000, 10,000 if the SGO wants to do it that way. And Kentucky kind of needed this because they had a state level tax credit scholarship program that got struck down in their court, which is stacked with activist judges who oppose school choice, because they argued that, well, because we have an education clause in our Constitution, that means we can't have anything else. But like we saw in Idaho, their state Supreme Court ruled the right way and said, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can have a public school system and also have school choice. These aren't mutually exclusive things. So I'd say Kentucky's I think is the only state Supreme Court that's ruled this way, basically ruling private contributions as public dollars, which is totally baffling. At the Supreme Court of the United States, they ruled in 2011, I believe, that private dollars remain private until they enter the tax collector's hands. Anything else is a communism, in my view, that all money belongs to the government, because theoretically they could take it from you, is just a ridiculous framing. And so all that aside, I'd say this is a big win. If any state is to opt into the program, Kentucky should be the first one to do so, because it's their last opportunity for school choice. They've tried everything else. They tried to get a constitutional amendment passed on the ballot, but it was so confusing. And when you're confused, the status quo is going to win. And so voters are just going to say no, even if they do support school choice. And they also weren't voting for a particular benefit program. And so even if it did pass, all it did was change things around in the Constitution, which was very confusing, very convoluted. And so this was the next best thing, opting into this program.
Corey, I love this debate about the federal tax credit, because it really highlights for us what people are, who's evil and who's not. And I didn't throw those words out there loosely. We were always told that the reason you can't have school choice is because that diverts money away from the government-run schools to the private schools. Now, I can shoot that down in about 10 seconds, but I'm not going to waste my time today doing that. But we were told that was the reason, right? In this particular case, with the federal tax credit, Governor Beshear cannot prevent Kentucky taxpayers from receiving the tax credit because it's a federal tax credit. So he has nothing to do with that whatsoever. So Kentucky taxpayers are going to take their money and put it into this system. And that's definitely going to happen. All he did by saying, I'm going to veto this, or by vetoing it, is to say the children of Kentucky cannot receive the benefits. How evil do you have to be?
Why in the world would you do that?
How mean-spirited do you have to be to say, oh, there's money out there for you. If you want a better education, there's a big pool of money out there for you, but I'm not going to let you have it. It's not going to cost the public schools a penny. It has nothing to do with them whatsoever. It only hurts Kentucky children. You've got to have a level of evilness in your heart to stand in front of a child and say, I will not let you have the best education possible, even if there's money to pay for it, that has no impact on any other student in the state.
It's total Trump derangement syndrome. And I think at some point, every single state, red or blue, is going to opt in, because it's kind of like the 21 drinking age, where it took 4 years for every state to come along. But because it was tied to federal highway funding, they all kind of saw the writing on the wall and said, this is what we got to do. I think this is what's going to happen with school choice. And it's even worse because these are private donations. And you're right, that money's going to flow to other states, whether Beshear likes it or not. And so much so, there's been a lot of wobbliness on this issue. Education Week has a map where they report the opt-in states. We're now at 28 states opting in, Kentucky being one of them. We have one Democrat state, Jared Polis from Colorado. He called this a no-brainer. He said that he'd be crazy not to opt in because of the same dynamic of shooting yourself in the foot if you don't. You don't want to leave money on the table, and you certainly don't want it flowing out of state to your political opponents in red states. And they originally reported that 4 Democrat governors said no, and they colored those, in blue or whatever on their map. They have since released a new article saying that 3 of them are now reconsidering. So several months ago, they were like, oh, Trump, school choice, we can't do this. But then now they're getting more information and saying, hold up, I don't just have to cave to the teachers union bosses. This might actually be a good idea. They've now gone back to Education Week, and they've emailed me. Oregon's Governor Tina Kotek, her team, after I asked her about it, said, actually, we are reconsidering opting in to the. So I think at some point, people like Andy Bashir are going to have their foot in their mouth and say this was a bad idea. The thing is, he's so in bed with Randy Weingarten. He just had her on his podcast recently. He's trying to run for president, and I guess he's not thinking about the general election. He just wants to get through the primary and wants to be he's running to the left as far as possible. And that's going to hurt him in the long run if he wants a true chance. Whereas Jared Polis, people have floated his name for president on the Democrat side. I think this would actually help Jared Polis opting in because school choice is an 80-20 issue. It's popular among voters. And with this particular program, I'd say the Democrats, this is their way to kind of thread the needle on the issue because you're right, it's not touching a penny of public taxpayer dollars. If anything, the public school districts can set up their own SGOs if they want. And there were actually some Kentucky legislators who voted against the other program that said, you know what, I'm going to vote for this one because there really isn't any argument against it. And so this is why you had such big override numbers.
I go back to my original statement. You actually have to be evil if you understand what you're doing. I assume Andy Bashir understood what he was doing when he vetoed the bill. That's my basic level of expectation for a governor. They know what they're doing before they veto it. I'm not sure it's always met, but I would love to take a student in a failing school, perhaps a failing school that's also a dangerous school, like a physically dangerous school, maybe for a young girl in 3rd grade, and have that girl and her parents stand in front of Andy Bashir and ask him, my child could go to a better, safer school where she will get a better education. It will cost you nothing. The money is there available for her, and yet you won't let her go. That's not a whole lot different from the folks who were standing in the doors in Alabama, not allowing Black children to go. Right. It's not a whole lot different. It's really what you're doing here is you're telling a poor kid they don't get a chance, not because it's going to hurt any other kid, just because you don't want them to have a chance.
One of my favorite quotes from former governor of Arizona, Doug Ducey, who got universal school choice done in 2022, the first state to do so. He said something along these same lines, Chip. He said, 50 plus years ago, union-backed politicians stood in the schoolhouse door to keep minorities out. Now, today, union-backed politicians stand in the schoolhouse door to keep minorities in their failing schools year after year, generation after generation. Okay. I think it was a powerful quote. You had the whole chamber stand up and applaud when he made his remarks. But Chip, I'd say this story is an A+ just because it was a great troll on the part of the Kentucky senators to override the veto and then basically rub it in his face.
Yeah, I'm going to give it an A because I don't know why on earth those 5 in the Senate and the 14 in the House voted against it. I mean, if you have any decency in your heart, you would not have supported the governor on this. But, look, I was in the law. I was in the legislature. No disrespect. I worked with some of the most brilliant people that I've ever met in my life, but also worked with some people where you kind of shake your head and say, how did they get elected? And so maybe that's the case. They just didn't understand it. But, man, you got to have a dark spirit to try to deny a child an education. It's sad.
Yep. And we are at 49 minutes in, so I'm going to try to do a speed round on this one. This is a similar story. Kansas, they have a Democrat governor they want to opt into, and they sent this bill to the governor the other day, 27-12 vote in the Senate, 76-44 vote in the House. The thing is, in Kentucky, the override is a simple majority. It was easy. We had a super majority in Kentucky to override, but in Kansas, you need a 2/3 majority. The Senate looks fine. The House vote does. I think you need 82 votes. So we'll see what happens. The thing is here that makes it a little bit more complicated is that in Kansas, they put two things in the bill. One, to opt into the program for the federal tax credit. They also included an expansion of their state level tax credit scholarship program. So if they don't override it, it's hindsight is 2020, but I think if they would have just made it about Trump's opt-in and kept them separate, it would be more likely to get the override supermajority they need, because this would make it to where no Republicans would want to cross Trump on the issue.
I mean, they made a bold move here. I give them credit for that. But you don't want to take up. Look, this is about the kids. Like, so let's just get them all the opportunities we can get for them today, and then get more for them tomorrow. But look, the governor of Kansas should just sign the bill. Like, we shouldn't be talking about it.
That's right. Yeah.
The tax credit itself, the state tax credit, is a really good idea. Obviously, the federal tax credit is a no-brainer, but she should sign the bill.
Yeah. So look, the writing isn't on the wall yet. She hasn't said no that she wouldn't opt in. So maybe she'll pull a Josh Stein, though, like in North Carolina, where he tried to say, "Oh, I don't need you Republicans. I can opt in myself. I don't want to give you any credit." So Josh Stein did that, but he also made it seem like, I can just give the money to kids in public schools, and I'm not going to have any scholarships for private schools. That would run counter to the intent of the law. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be more clarity coming out on that soon. I'd give this a B, because we're in the middle of things. There could still be a veto.
I'm going to give it an A for effort and a B for tactics.
That's right. All right, cool. And then speaking of Kansas, there's a university there called Washburn University. Accuracy in Media has been going across the country, particularly in red states, where they're getting people to admit they're still pushing DEI. I'll just show you this quick little trailer. It's 12 seconds. They do these undercover videos. And here's an example of what's going on in Kansas.
We got a notice to look at all of our stuff and take out the word diversity and all that sort of stuff. To my knowledge, we didn't do any of that here.
Wait, Mr. Carter, do not talk.
So they go and confront. You can see the whole video on the Accuracy in Media YouTube page, but it's pretty amazing. You had one of the comms director, basically her entire thing was to say, "Oh my goodness, you didn't tell us that you were interviewing us or that professor." Well, of course, he's not going to admit these things if he knows that they're recording it. And she tried to say that is illegal to do so. The president of Accuracy in Media, Adam Gillette, quickly replied saying, "Aha, I'm sorry to let you know, but Kansas is a one-party consent state when it comes to recording things." So Accuracy Media knows what they're doing. They're not going to go here and get in trouble. They've done this in hundreds of instances, catching people with undercover video. And so they're not going to go into a state where it's not allowed. She
clearly didn't want to talk about the issue at hand. She wanted to talk about how they acquired the information that revealed them violating the law. So this is a joke. I mean,
and immediately when he said, "I'm sorry, but Kansas is a one-party state for when it comes to recording things," she shut up and she said, "I'm not doing an interview with you." And then she ran off, and basically goes to show you they just want to protect their own, sweep things under the rug. And I'd say, this stuff that happens wasn't an education school. A lot of teachers are trained in these education schools. A lot of them, just they jump through the hoops just to get their ability to teach, and then they forget all of it. But some of them, they get radicalized in these higher education systems where they push DEI like it's a religion. And we need to reform the higher education system too, not just K through 12. But I don't know. I'd say a B or so on the Accuracy in Media video. It was funny. It was a great investigative journalism, but we still need more accountability than that.
I'll give it a B. It's always interesting to watch folks who are charged with doing the right thing to get caught doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, exactly. So Mississippi, we have a win. the governor just signed a bill, Tate Reeves, which, by the way, Tate Reeves is awesome. He has been a school choice freedom fighter. Guess what he just did? He told reporters that he may be interested in calling a special session on school choice because their school choice bill passed the House, got over to the Senate, where they killed the bill in a 90-second hearing, didn't even talk about the issue at hand. And you had the Senate Education Committee kill the school choice bill. So there's talks of a special session coming, and that's exactly what Governor Greg Abbott did in Texas to push the issue. Governor Tate Reeves is picking up the mantle and showing leadership. And there's a related issue that just passed. It passed their House overwhelmingly, 78-39. Their Senate barely passed this bill, even though they have tons of Republicans there, which goes to show you they're the less conservative chamber that also was holding up school choice. Their Lieutenant Governor, Delbert Hosemann, sent his kids to private school, yet opposes it for everybody else. He's pulling up the ladder from behind himself. And what this bill does, it's similar to a bill that's floating around in Oklahoma right now, is that it allows for secret elections when it comes to union members, keeping their privacy and their personal information confidential. It also protects taxpayer dollars from being used to pressure workers into joining a union. So this is doesn't go as far as Florida's bill, right, Chip? But it does allow kind of employees to have have less pressure coming from the top from the union bosses.
It's similar to a bill that was passed in Georgia that Governor Kemp championed and signed into law, which is fantastic. I want people to understand this because a lot of people don't know how this works. So when unionizing happens under the rules known as card check, what that means is that someone starts the process of finding half of the workforce to be in favor of a union. Now, in any other election, there's typically, okay, here's the voting time, you vote, and whoever wins, whoever loses, and you vote like you do any other vote in private. Like you don't have to tell anybody how you voted. That's your right to vote the way you want, and you shouldn't have to share that information if you don't want to. But in the card check world, you check a card. That's why they call it card check. And they keep gathering those cards until they get 50%. Now, one of the tactics that they use is they literally come to your house to force you to sign the card. I mean, this is absurd. That's not the way we should ever run any election. It also shows that if you have to use those type of tactics, maybe what you're selling and pushing isn't the best thing, right? Setting that aside for a moment, that's how they do it. They do card check combined with the pressure tactics at your own home. So this bill actually prevents the unions from getting the mailing addresses, the home addresses of those employees, which is good. No one should have to give up their information for that purpose. And number two, it says you have to have the private election. You should be allowed to vote in privacy, not using card check. So this is a great piece of legislation. It's shocking that the Mississippi Senate passed it. I mean, I'm starting to wonder what's going on in Mississippi with those senators. But as you pointed out, Tate Reeves, a fantastic governor. They call it the Mississippi miracle for what he's done in education. We should trust Tate Reeves on these type issues, and we thank the governor for showing leadership in getting this done.
Absolutely. What's your take on a grade for this bill in Mississippi? B plus?
I'm gonna give it B plus. Yeah, it's a solid first step. Plus, it also alarmed many of us by seeing just maybe how bad the Tennessee or the Mississippi Senate is, and that maybe there needs to be some corrections in that Senate.
This is why they don't want to take a vote on school choice, and they try to kill it in committee because they know they have too many of the Republicans towing the Democrat teachers union party line. I guess what I've heard is a lot of their Republicans used to be Democrats, and because of the change in politics, they just changed parties and ran as Republicans because they knew they were more likely to be able to win that way. And I think we're seeing some evidence of that in some of these deeper red states like Mississippi. But I'm going to run through like 4 of these headlines right now real quick. Mississippi, just so we can, we're at an hour already. So Missouri, there's a bill to, it's paycheck protection that's been introduced, prohibiting public school districts from deducting contributions to unions or political funds from employee paychecks. So if you want to do that in your own time, you want to do it voluntarily, it's fine. But the district government resources shouldn't be used to steal money from teachers to be used for political purposes and to go towards union politics. So that's one thing. It hasn't moved. We'll talk more about it once it moves. In Illinois, there was an election on Tuesday in Illinois, school choice was on the ballot, urging Governor Pritzker to opt into the school choice program at the federal level. And 63% of the voters who had it in their county, only 31 of the counties actually had it on the ballot, had enough signatures to get it on the ballot. But it was overwhelming support, 63% support. A majority of voters in every single county voted to opt into the Trump school choice tax credit scholarship program. And so hopefully JB Pritzker does the right thing there. And I just took a couple of examples of where the unions are becoming politically toxic. There was a Republican in office, Noreen Hammond, who was in there for 14 years and who was backed by the teachers union. She lost by 25 points to someone who supports school choice. So the teachers union endorsement is becoming the political kiss of death in Republican primaries in particular, just like in Texas. And even on the Democrat side, the teachers union backed candidate only got 16% of the vote. The Democrat who won by overwhelmingly, he actually supports opting into Trump's new school choice program and wants JB Pritzker to do that. So all that aside, the Chicago Teachers Union had a bad night. They endorsed 13 candidates, and a majority of those candidates that they endorsed in contested elections lost, and they squandered union dues on this stuff. $362,000 came from the Chicago Teachers Unions on the candidates they supported who lost their election in the primaries on Tuesday night. So the Chicago Teachers Union now has a net negative 26% favorability rating, which means 54% of voters have an unfavorable view of CTU, and only 27.5% say they have a favorable view. They're about twice as likely voters to say that they don't like the CTU. They have come off, they've just gone off the deep end. They've fallen off a cliff with their approval ratings. And that may be why politicians are running away from the CTU endorsement. Some of them who kept their endorsement of the CTU didn't even include their endorsement on their website this time in the Democrat primary. That's a big deal. And it goes to show you that the unions have gotten so bad that both parties are rejecting them.
Yeah, they've become radicalized in many locations. I mean, don't take our word for it. You can go look at the activities of Chicago teachers unions and others and see that they're doing things that have nothing to do with kids, nothing to do with education, and for the most part, nothing even to do with teachers. And so if you don't represent the teachers, you don't represent the kids, you don't represent education in general, why do you exist? And so I think rightfully so, the general public is looking at this saying, if a Chicago teachers union or any teachers union stamp of approval is on a candidate, then that's not my candidate.
And they're pissing off the members too. I mean, there's a lawsuit right now. I'm also on the board of Liberty Justice Center, full disclosure, but we represented 4 Chicago Teachers Union members in suing the Chicago Teachers Union leadership for not providing their annually required financial audits for 5 years in a row. The Wall Street Journal covered it. There's a congressional investigation happening on the issue as well. And you know what? They don't even do the bare minimum of transparency. So they're not just upsetting parents and kids who have failing school systems. They're not just upsetting politicians who don't want anything to do with them anymore. They're upsetting their own members for being so political and just not even giving them the time of day and providing financial disclosures and information to their members. It seems like a pretty basic task that they're failing spectacularly at. And
not even just a basic task, it's the legal task. So
it's the legal task. Yeah, it's not even like something that you should do. It's that you're required to do. And there's some evidence they lied in court, because there's 2 things that they said that can't both be true. You had Chicago Teachers Union President Stacey Davis Gates, who sent her own kid to a private school, by the way. She was in an Illinois court at the state level saying that they didn't provide these audits because COVID happened, and they had a lot of other things that they were doing, and the audits are going to come, and it's because of COVID. But at the same time, during those same years, every single year, she was signing off their reports to the federal government, Department of Labor and elsewhere, that they were doing their required annual audits financially every year. So which one's true? Were you lying to the federal government on these forms saying you did do them when you actually didn't? Or were you lying in the Illinois court by saying that that you didn't do them when you actually had. Both of those things can't be true. Either way, the union bosses look like they're lying in Chicago. I'd give this a B plus or an A minus in Chicago for the unions losing a bunch of elections. But it kind of sucks that it's coming out of teachers' dues. They need to leave their union. You can contact Americans for Fair Treatment for more information on how to leave your union if you don't want to continue giving your money to people like Stacey Davis Gates, who uses the funding for political causes.
Yeah, AFFT.org, and we help people get out of unions. If you have a legal issue with your union, if you've been discriminated against, we will help you. We're just there to help, especially teachers, firefighters, law enforcement, border patrol agents. If you're in the public sector doing amazing work on behalf of the American people, we're here to help. And we certainly don't think you should be abused by your union. So AFFT.org is the place to go.
And on that note, we had good news this week alone. Over the past 6 months, almost 1,900 employees, I bet you we're over that number now already, almost 2,000 employees have already contacted Americans for Fair Treatment for help with opting out of their public sector unions. And that's just in 6 months. So it's a lot of momentum in a short amount of time. We're going to reach escape velocity, and those numbers are only going to grow when they see more of the problems in the union. We're over time. I was going to ask Chip about his new op-ed, but go check it out. It's at Real Truth Media, about how people are moving to right to work states. And it's probably because they have better policies for workers and other people in society alike. There was something in Oregon. I don't know if you want to hit that real quick, Chip. I don't know what's happened in Oregon, but it looks like we had a pretty big ruling out of Oregon.
Yeah, the Oregon ruling was the governor tried to say that if you wanted to do a state project, you had to be a union employer. Rightfully, the court said, no, that's ridiculous. You can't do that. And that's standing up for the taxpayer. So thanks to the courts there. And then, of course, you mentioned my op-ed. I hope people get a chance to take a look at that. Some undeniable information that highly unionized states create economies that people must flee from. And so they are fleeing in large numbers to the states that have right to work, to the states that are not highly unionized. So when you get a chance of that just take a good read and share it with whoever you think might like it.
All right, cool. So I think I had more stories, Chip. We're way over time. We have a bunch of people tuned in. I wish we can stay in longer, but we have other things that we have to attend to, calls we have to get on. And so thank you, everybody, for showing up. This was the Red Pen Podcast, powered by Americans for Fair Treatment with my co-host Chip Rogers, CEO of Americans for Fair Treatment. And I'm also a senior fellow with Americans for Fair Treatment, in addition to my role as a research fellow with the Heritage Foundation. Check us out every Thursday, usually around this time at each Thursday afternoon. And also make sure you tune in Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern. I'll be talking with the Education Commissioner of Florida about a lot of the wins that they're having in the free state of Florida. So thanks, Chip. It's always good talking to you. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Check us out again soon on the Red Pen Podcast with Americans for Fair Treatment.
Thanks, Corey.